All right, great. Um, well, thank you all for joining. Minute past the hour, so lots to cover today. So let's get started. My name's Matt Poirier. I'm Director of Policy here at the Building Decarbonization Alliance, and excited to be talking to you about the important role that building performance standards can play in reducing building emissions. This webinar is part of our Building Decarbonization webinar series, which is really aimed at provoking discussion and sharing knowledge from leading decarbonization experts. We're going to be holding a few of these um, every couple months or so, so please stay tuned on your social feeds and in our newsletter for upcoming events. A few kind of housekeeping items to touch on before we get started. So if there's any francophones on the call today, we do have simultaneous translation available. Malgré que le webinaire soit présenté en anglais, vous pouvez activer l'option afficher les sous-titres qui est située en bas de votre écran et recevoir une transcription simultanée. I also just wanted to get a sense of where people are joining from today. So please do let us know where you're joining us from by adding your location to the chat. We at the Building Decarbonization Alliance have staff across the country and in many provinces, and we acknowledge the many traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples on which we work and live. I'm joining personally from Barrie, Ontario, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people. We recognize here at the BDA and respect the ongoing relationships that Indigenous peoples have to the land, and we commit to the ongoing process of reconciliation. Couple pieces on logistics. So we'll have a question and answer period at the end of the call or towards the end of the call. Please do use the Q&A function that's located at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. We'll also be holding a few polling questions during the call, so be great to respond to those. And I'll ask John to just put the first one up now so that we can take a quick look and see how that works. Great. So poll should have popped up. Essentially, how familiar are you with building performance standards? Excellent. Seeing a lot of kind of fives and aboves on this one, so relatively well informed. So we're looking forward to some good questions today. Great. Last piece I want to touch on before I get started is really just on if you do have any technical issues, please do reach out to John Perkis, who's on the line, and he can try to assist you there. Excellent. Okay. In terms of the BDA, just wanted to you know introduce ourselves. I know many of you are familiar with our work, but for those of you who are new to us, oops, sorry. We are a nonpartisan and cross-sector coalition working to change the narrative on building heat, looking to inspire and inform industry and government leadership, and looking to accelerate market transformation. So we see electrification as a credible, compelling, and capable pathway for building decarbonization. We don't see it as the only pathway by any means, but it is going to be key for the sector. It's also important to note that we're not doing this alone. We're working with more than 260 industry partners spanning the building ecosystem. So we've identified a few different types of organizations here, and we've got more joining every week. For today, having wrapped up kind of those opening remarks, I'll do a quick interview or overview of the building performance standards and their status in Canada. And then I'll introduce our moderator, who will invite our panelists to share their firsthand experience with building performance standards in the States. Then we'll have some time for questions. And again, please do write your questions into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So quick building performance standard 101. So BPS is a policy tool that helps drive the reduction of either energy consumption or carbon emissions in existing buildings. It ultimately requires buildings to report their actual electricity and fossil fuel usage, typically compares that reporting against other similar types of buildings to create targets, and then ultimately levies penalties on those who do not meet the targets by a certain deadline. there's a lot of different names for building performance standards. Sometimes they go by BPS, sometimes they go by BEPS, or building energy performance standards, or building emissions. EPS, just the energy or emissions performance standards, but ultimately they're all using a similar type of approach. Um, the implementation of EPS can be used as a tool to help stimulate economic and workforce growth for commercial retrofits by creating demands for the goods and services and ultimately the capital required to do these retrofit projects. Usually they're focused on doing kind of energy efficiency or electrification, maybe renewable energy generation and storage type initiatives. And BPS, while one tool in kind of the toolkit, they're often well complemented by other policies and initiatives to support building owners in their decarbonization efforts. So things like financing or grants or providing technical support. There's usually a three-step process to implementation. Typically, you'll start with kind of a reporting phase where building energy consumption data is sent to the collection entity, typically a government entity. This can be done manually or automatically with the support from utilities. Then there's usually a benchmarking type phase, so a comparison between similar types of buildings on that energy or emissions piece. And this can help set some realistic long-term targets on that front. Can also include some publicly visible labeling components, so just putting it out there what buildings are using. This reporting and benchmarking phases ultimately set the stage for performing. And at that stage, usually buildings are asked to meet a certain energy or carbon limit by a set date, and that's to help drive retrofits and continuous improvement for those buildings over time. Usually there's a structure to phase that in. Sometimes it's by building type, sometimes by size, sometimes with different milestone dates. And while there's different compliance pathways, and we'll touch on some of those during kind of the panelists discussions today, the ultimate goal remains driving retrofits. In Canada, I'll give you a relatively quick overview of what's happening across the country. And I'll just note that this is to the best of my knowledge. So if I am missing anything and I'll ask again at the end, please do let me know in the chat and I'll make sure to kind of amend this. So that'd be really helpful. In general, we're still relatively early in the implementation of BPS in Canada, which is why we have some great speakers from the States to kind of share what they've been up to on their front. So get to this map. On the reporting front, so we've got a few jurisdictions that have mandatory reporting, so providing that electricity and gas consumption information. Vancouver started requiring reporting this year with commercial buildings that are greater than 100,000 square feet. They're ultimately going to move over kind of a 3-year period to capturing buildings that are above 50,000 square feet, both commercial and multi-unit buildings. In Toronto, 2024, this year was also the first year for mandatory reporting for buildings over 50,000 square feet in this case. And then next year, they'll be looking to get data from buildings that are greater than 10,000 square feet as well. Montreal started the reporting requirement in 2022, so a few years ago now, with commercial buildings that are greater than 15,000 square meters. As of this year, they're now including commercial and multi-family buildings, which are over 2,000 square meters, and that represents about 8,000 buildings across the city. The province that's requiring mandatory reporting, the province of Ontario, and that's through their energy and water reporting benchmark regulation. So this has been in place since 2019, looking at buildings over 100,000 square feet, putting in their data. But in 2023, that was amended to buildings over 50,000 square feet as well. So those are the mandatory reporting places. Even though it's mandatory, there aren't like fines or anything if you're, or maybe there aren't always fines if you're lagging on that reporting piece. So it is mandatory where it's very much encouraged, but but compliance rates aren't at 100% or anything like that. There's also a few jurisdictions that have voluntary programs, so like pilot programs or optional programs. So Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Ottawa, Durham region also has a voluntary reporting piece. For provinces, BC has Building Benchmark BC, which is a publicly accessible kind of database, and there's 22 municipalities that are participating in that within BC. Quebec has an interesting program that's put on by BOMA Quebec, the Défi Énergie, which is a friendly voluntary competition for that province. And then in Nova Scotia, there's Efficiency Nova Scotia that has a benchmarking pilot. So that's kind of the reporting or that first step. And then if we're looking at performance side of things, Vancouver's really leading the way here. So they have an emissions focused policy in place with enforcement that's looking to start in 2027 based on consumption data from the year 2026 for commercial buildings that are greater than 100,000 square feet. Montreal has an emissions timeline in place, so they're looking to begin enforcement in 2028 for very large commercial buildings. And then Toronto currently is in the process of developing their emissions policy. So they're engaging with stakeholders like many of yourselves with the goal of ultimately finalizing that policy in 2025. At the provincial level, we've got Quebec that earlier this year passed Law 41, which is setting the stage for building performance standards across the province. There's no regulations or a firm date set yet for implementation there, but it is something that they're working on. So again, if I did miss anything, please do include it in the chat, and I'll be happy to take a look and kind of add to that. Great. So I think that's probably enough for me. Time to hear from the panel. So first, I'd like to just pass things off to Belinda Gilby, who's the co-founder and president of Bondi Energy. They're focused on retrofitting multifamily and commercial buildings with heat pumps, which is pretty exciting. So Belinda, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you everyone for being on the call today. Again, my name is Belinda Gilby, a partner at Bondi Energy, and Matt did a good summary on who we are and what we do. And with that, I will invite each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Christine.
Hello and bonjour. I'm Christine Gibney. I am the Building Technical Compliance Co-Lead for the DC Department of Energy and Environment, DOEE. We are a district, which is like a state, and but we are not the federal people, even though we're in Washington. And I'll tell you all about our program in a minute.
Thanks, Christine. And next up, we have Adrian.
Hi, my name is Adrian Gross. It's great to be with everyone today. I am a Vice President of Property Management at WC Smith. We're a DC-based real estate firm, so looking forward to talking to you all today.
Thanks, Adrian. And last but not least, Luke, on to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Luke Lanciano. I'm the Director of Sustainability at the Tower Companies. We're based in Rockville, Maryland, just outside DC, but our portfolio includes buildings in both Maryland as well as DC, office and multifamily. So I'm glad to be here today.
Thanks, Luke. All right, so each of the panelists has prepared a short presentation with a few slides. So we'll start with Christine's slides, and then at the end of everyone's presentations, I'll ask a few questions to the panelists. And please, if you think of any questions yourselves, you can input them into the Q&A section below at the bottom here. So I think Matt will get started on the slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda. And I get to start with the reason I like to get out of bed in the morning is because I get to work on trying to implement making DC the healthiest, greenest, most livable city in the country. So let me tell you how we're going to do that. Could you go to the next slide? We have an overarching sustainable DC plan, which has some sub-plans to it. And the one that DC BEPS and benchmarking fall under is Clean Energy DC. And Clean Energy DC has a goal of a 60% emission reduction by 2020 and carbon neutrality by 2045. So Clean Energy DC addresses basically three major sources of DC's greenhouse gas emissions. The first one is buildings. The next one is energy supply. And the final one is transportation. And I just want to highlight one thing about energy supply. One of the things that I'm not going to talk about really is renewable energy, because that's baked into the plan in that renewable energy supply. So everything I'm going to talk about is really about energy conservation and reduction in buildings. Next slide. And one of the reason that buildings are so important in DC is because our industry is essentially people. So what do? People are in buildings. So over 75% of the greenhouse gas emissions in DC are based on buildings. You'll see the rest is really, some transportation and some waste in there, but buildings really are essentially the low-hanging fruit in DC. Next slide. So we have codified, I told you about the Clean Energy DC plan. Now I'm going to tell you about things that we've actually put in law so that they can be implemented. Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act that was signed in 2018 first lowered the minimum square footage for buildings required to benchmark. And I'll give you more information about that in a minute. But it's really important to know that we have been benchmarking in DC for over 10 years. And then the other piece is energy performance, and that's when we implemented our BEPS program, which I now am one of the technical leads on implementing this. Let's see if we can go to the next slide. Sure. Well, let's talk about the benchmarking and BEPS applicability. So while they are two programs, BEPS 1 has those buildings that have been benchmarking for a long time. Those are private buildings, 50,000 square feet and above, as well as our private buildings. And those buildings are going through a cycle that I'm going to show you in just a minute. Then in future cycles, we'll be going into buildings that are 25,000 square feet in BEPS 2. Those buildings started benchmarking in 2021. And then BEPS 3, which is further out, will go down as low as buildings 10,000 square feet and above. And they'll be going into a BEPS cycle subsequently. Next slide. So let's talk about kind of more of the details about our BEPS timeline. The first thing I have to apologize for is the BEPS cycle is 6 years. You're going to see 7 years here because we made an adjustment during COVID. But essentially, it's created as a 6-year cycle, which in year 1 we set the BEPS. So for the current cycle 1. We are using a Energy Star portfolio manager, which I know is something that is used in Canada as well. And that will determine basically where you fall amongst the use types of buildings that you are reviewed against. So all the typical use types in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. If you can get an Energy Star score, we will work with an Energy Star score. If not, we'll usually go to weather normalized source EUI. So during year 1, we look at, is this building above or below the median, the local median? So if you are from an Energy Star Portfolio Manager score perspective, if you are higher, which means that you use less energy, we will see you in 2027 because we're not going to have any requirements for you. If you're in the lower median, that's when you go into this compliance cycle that I'm about to walk you through. So when you get to, so in 2023, we had our first milestone, and that first milestone required buildings to make a pathway selection to decide, how they were going to demonstrate compliance. And I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. And then from a BEPS program perspective, the next year that is most relevant for most pathways is really going to 2026 is the year that the data that we will collect will be reported and evaluated in 2027. And that will determine if a building's in the compliance cycle, whether they're subject to an alternative compliance penalty. Our alternative compliance penalties are based on $10 per square foot. And that number came out of a study that we did that said that that's about what you need to do to improve performance in a building. And the objective of our program is to have owners put that money into their buildings. If we will have a successful program, if we don't have to penalize or fine anybody. But also, the more that we've worked through regulation, sometimes people need a little incentive, or sometimes there's a stick. So that's the BEPS program. I want to mention benchmarking. So benchmarking goes on continuously through this period, and we also just did third-party verification. So we had a third party review the benchmarking data that has been presented, because that's really, really important to any program, because you got to make sure your data is right. Next slide. So for buildings that are in the compliance cycle, there's basically three major pathways, really kind of two. And then there's an alternative compliance pathway, which is the kind of catch-all. If there's something that you think doesn't apply to your building, you can always do your alternative compliance pathway. The primary one is performance pathway, and that requires a site EUI reduction of 20% from when we set the BEPS. And that's kind of more flexible for most owners. The standard target pathway is available to high performance buildings that they just have to meet basically the BEPS that they would have to have achieved in 2021. If they're not a high performance building, though, they're not eligible to that. And the prescriptive pathway, you have to do everything that's in the prescriptive pathway in order to stay on the prescriptive pathway. And then there's a waiver of any type of penalty. Next slide. And I just wanted to give you a quick discussion about outreach, because it's absolutely critical. And basically, we started working on outreach before the law was even passed, where they had working groups and also set up a building innovation hub, which works on putting owners and industry and government together to try to make sure that people are ready to implement changes in their building to meet, BEPS and benchmarking standards. And then we formalized this also. The mayor, once the law was passed, the mayor implemented a task force. So there's a task force that Adrian's actually on that helps advise all of our rulemaking and the process, and they continue to meet even though we're in the middle of the cycle. We've also done formal things like, classic rulemaking that's required by law. And then we've done a lot of informal webinars, outreach. Most of my job tends to be compliance assistance, trying to help people be compliant with both benchmarking and with BEPS, as well as the last part. And I think Adrian's part is going to talk a little bit about this, is we also have done a lot of outreach for affordable housing. So with that, that's a quick overview, and we can dig into anything that I said. Let me pass you back to Belinda. You want me to pass you to Adrian directly, or?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I think that was a really great summary of how the program is structured in DC. So thank you. And with that, I'll hand it to Adrian. Excuse me.
Hi again, everyone. I'm Adrian with WC Smith. In my current role, I lead our benchmarking and BEPS efforts, and also manage a portfolio of multifamily properties. So my first exposure to BEPS was during some of the working groups that Christine referenced earlier, where we were just trying to learn about what a BPS was, what a BEPS was. And then ultimately, I did join the task force. And so today I'll just be trying to provide a bit of a property management perspective on DC BEPS. Just a couple of notes about WC Smith. We are a multidisciplinary real estate firm based in Washington, D.C., And since 1968, you know, we've had pretty strong roots in the city. We manage about 8,500 apartments in the city. And, you know, that's across kind of all types of properties, all, you know, rent controlled, you know, other affordable and luxury as well. And we're in all 8 wards of the city. Next slide, please. The company has a commitment to sustainability. We incorporate, you know, green building design into all of our new and renovation projects. The company's earned 12 LEED certifications of silver or higher for its properties, and including the first LEED Platinum certification given to a multifamily building in DC, which was for Sheridan Station, which is one of our affordable properties as well. Next slide, please. And so here is just a look at how things are going in BEPS cycle 1 in our portfolio. So we had 8 multifamily buildings that scored below the BEPS. And so of those 8, 7 are affordable or rent controlled, you know, or naturally occurring affordable. And most of them are constructed kind of in this 1920-ish to 1950-ish period. And then we also had one newer, highly amenitized building. So the first thing I guess we had to do was kind of determine what pathway we would take. And we did that with the help of the DC Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator, which is one of the programs that Christine was just referencing. And so we reached out to them and we were able to have, you know, an audit done at each property. And that gave us a lot of information on which pathway, you know, might be best for us and which types of measures we could pursue. And so a lot of our properties were right just below BEPS, you know, where we were able to take the standard target pathway. And so that pathway is just, you know, we had to improve our Energy Star score essentially to the median. And so that was kind of our focus, you know, out of the list of measures that we had, you know, you can see the list here that of some of them that we've been able to tackle so far. The first just kind of being just basic riser insulation. You know, we had noticed that, you know, through the audit really helped bring it to our attention that a lot of our properties, just over time, you know, older buildings leaks and pipe replacements. We had some insulation that was missing we needed to address. We had already done, you know, a lot of lighting upgrades, but, you know, we still had some room, you know, to add new fixtures, be that, you know, new LED fixtures, be that in boiler rooms, lights that are always on, or, you know, even into some individual units. We were able to go a lot further with that. I think probably like the most impactful and successful measure so far we've been able to pursue is upgrading our boiler controls. A lot of these buildings have steam heating systems, and so you know, recently that we discovered there's some new technology that allowed us to kind of run our boilers based off indoor temperatures, and we were able to save quite a bit of gas during the heating season through that. The chiller replacement that's listed here was kind of something that was in the works. You know, our equipment was towards the end of its useful life, and so we took the opportunity to do a study. We learned that it was a little bit oversized for the building, and so we were able to put in a new, more efficient chiller. And then the last piece of this was just, you know, we are doing a solar study. You know, Christine mentioned, you know, just that BEPS is really focused on energy reduction, but we do know that solar can help improve our Energy Star scores a little bit as well. So we're just spending a little more time looking into that and seeing how that might benefit us in the first compliance cycle. And so that was, you know, those are my notes. I just thank you all for your time, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thanks, Adrian. It's really interesting to hear from the property management perspective in regards to these BEPS programs. So thank you. And with that, Luke, handing it to you.
Thanks, Belinda. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm the Director of Sustainability at the Tower Companies. And basically what I do is across our portfolio, I take the lead on all of our various sustainability initiatives. We're a company that was founded in 1947. And for the last several decades, we've been really focused on making some of the most sustainable, healthiest buildings that we can, because we develop properties, we own and manage them for the long term. So we're really focused on doing that. Some of my credentials, I'm a lead accredited professional for operations and maintenance, which is one of the lead protocols for existing buildings. I'm what's called a Fitwell ambassador, which is a certification program for healthy buildings that promote, basically it's an active design type system where you're encouraging people to, do things like take the stairs. You're encouraging people to connect more with nature through lots of great views and adequate lighting throughout the facility. I'm also a certified energy manager. So I have, kind of a very low level, I would say, grasp of kind of the energy auditing basics for auditing buildings, which I like to use throughout our portfolio. And it helps with, a range of functions as you're talking with engineers, your building maintenance staff, and outside vendors who are coming into the building and offering different solutions. So I found those certifications to be pretty helpful in different areas of my work. I've also been involved over the past couple of years in some of the BEPS, basically the working groups that have developed BEPS in the various jurisdictions in which I work. So I serve on the Building Performance Improvement Board in Montgomery County, Maryland, which advised the Department of Energy or Department of Energy and the Environment Protection over in Montgomery County on their BEPS rulemaking process, advising them on a variety of different resources that they could provide to building owners, different ways to structure the regulations to make them as effective as possible and reach people appropriately. I was also appointed by the governor of Maryland to be a part of this Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force last year, which helped to, give some advice, some feedback from industry partners as the state was looking at its own BEPS platform. Maryland is in kind of an interesting situation where the county in which our buildings are in Maryland has its own BEPS framework, and then the state above it has a slightly different BEPS framework. So that's kind of an interesting wrinkle in all of this to sort of keep in mind as you have provinces and different cities looking at these regulations. I also serve as the co-chair. I'm actually outgoing this year, the Emerging Leaders Council with the local trade organization for apartment and office building folks. So I have kind of my foot in two different worlds, working with a lot of different real estate leaders in the region and working with some policymakers on, how to really approach these sustainability measures. And next slide. So a very quick overview of how I look at sustainability and, sort of our healthy buildings focus. It's impossible to fully distill sustainability into 5 points, but I tried. So carbon neutrality is, kind of our focus. We would love to get to a point where we are fully decarbonized, where we don't need to neutralize any carbon emissions, but we're not quite there yet. What we do is every year since 2010, we procure 100% of our operational electricity from renewable sources, and then we offset our on-site gas use using various offsets. Usually, it's methane reclamation from different landfills nearby. We like the way that our buildings produce trash. It seems only fair that we help recover some of that methane from those landfills. And we're really proud of our carbon neutrality, but our goal ultimately is to fully remove the carbon from our building's operational cycle. Our goal is to do that by the centennial of our company, which would be 2047. I'd love to do it sooner, but it's quite a challenging process. So that's sort of our lodestar and the thing we're always leaning towards. So Christine did a great job talking about kind of the energy efficiency focus of DC's BEPS program, and that's something we've similarly been focused on. Just about 95% of our properties are Energy Star certified, so they are more efficient than 75% of similar buildings across our country. And we are LEED certified at also about 95% of our properties under that operations and maintenance framework. So every several years, actually next year is our next due date, we recertify via that program, make sure that we have everything in place at the buildings to ensure that they are managed sustainably, that all of the various property management functions that go on in any property are being done to those high standards. We also focus a lot on health and wellness. We work with the UL Verified Healthy Building Mark, which looks at all of our air handling units. We work with the Fitwell program, as I mentioned earlier. On transit, most of our buildings are easily accessible via public transit, and we offer things like bike storage rooms in a lot of our buildings, and electric vehicle charging stations as well. And then another thing that sometimes is forgotten in the sustainability conversation, but waste. We have a composting program throughout our properties, and we offer e-waste recycling as well. And our focus is to divert over 75% of waste away from landfills and have it either be recycled, composted, reused somewhere. So that's another big focus for us. Next slide. So I wanted to give you a brief case study for one of our buildings. This is Blair East Apartments in Silver Spring, Maryland. This is actually just across the border from Washington, D.C. It's, I think, about 200 yards away. It's 394 apartments. It's about 500,000 square feet. It's a building from 1962. So Adrian was mentioning challenges with older buildings, and I very much feel those challenges. So this sort of building has a central gas, hydronic heat, and hot water system. There are a series of boilers in the boiler room that provide all the heating loops during cold weather. And that has definitely been like the big focus as we try to make this building as low carbon as possible, because that's the biggest use by far. This building, since actually last year, we just passed the 1 year mark last week, has a 130 kW solar array on the roof that produces about 120,000 kilowatt hours per year. It's a LEED Gold certified building under that operations and maintenance framework. And its most recent Energy Star score is a 92 out of 100. So if this was actually just a couple hundred yards away in Washington, D.C., Christine would be giving me a high five and we'd be all set with BEPS compliance. But this is in Montgomery County, which has a slightly different standard for how they rate buildings. So Montgomery County in Maryland, their proposed BEPS standard is based on the site energy use intensity. Right now, it's looking like that will probably be a 37 site energy use intensity, so the kBTU over square foot of the building. And the site energy use intensity of this building is a 44. So we need to drop it a bit. There will certainly be some, there might be some changes, like it's still a proposed standard. It hasn't quite finished the rulemaking process. So that's something I'm taking, a pretty good look at. The other layer on top of this, because we're also in Maryland, is that the Maryland BEPS standard focuses on what are called net direct emissions. So sort of the on-site emissions that, there are certain exemptions like commercial cooking that get pulled out. their focus currently is on those net direct emissions, and then eventually that will include a site EUI target. But for me, when I'm looking at this building, it's the gas system. It's making it more insulated so that it can effectively keep people comfortable and provide that necessary heat during the winter time without basically using too much to push us over those site EUI targets that we're looking at. Some really quick projects that we've been working on or have completed. We've done new risers throughout the building for the hydronic heating system. That included a lot of new insulation. And that's definitely had some beneficial energy components to it. New windows are currently being installed. I think we're about to finish within the next week, which everyone's very excited about. And those new windows, are really replacing 1960s era windows. So the R value will be much higher, and it should hold a lot more of that comfort inside the building. I mentioned the on-site solar that we had installed. That does help us in Montgomery County. They have a special portion that they will basically grant us a small exemption for that site EUI target based on the solar production we have each year. And then, of course, we've done sort of the standard energy efficiency pieces. Variable frequency drives are always very valuable. We've been installing those wherever we can on major pumps and fans. Been pursuing feasibility studies around how to decarbonize most effectively the heating system at that building, including air-to-water heat pumps, and taking all the apartments, which of course have gas stoves in them, and thinking about the next steps for how they could shift over to potentially electric stoves in the future, which would of course include electric panel replacements. So a lot of this work is ongoing, but we're aiming to within the next several years, and especially as the county finalizes its regulations, be able to get this building and some similar buildings that we have in our portfolio across the finish line. And with that, I'll pass it back to Linda.
Great, thanks, Luke. It's definitely encouraging and inspiring to see organizations such as yours really take the lead in terms of decarbonization and perhaps taking measures that are beyond what are just required of you from a regulation standpoint. So with that, I will ask a few questions to the panelists, and then we'll get to the participant questions at the very end. So my first question is for Christine. So Christine, are there any sort of meaningful or valuable lessons that you've learned from other jurisdictions in the US and you've taken those lessons to DC to help build your own program? And can you comment on that? And then I guess it's a two-part question. Beyond that, what does success look like over the next 5 years for the BEPS program in DC?
Let me see. Can I start with two?
Yeah.
So I think success for us would absolutely be to get through the compliance cycle 1 and not have to fine anybody. That would be success. Now, that would really be successful, but that's really where we're trying to go, and that's why we spend so much time on outreach and compliance assistance and trying to. These are really hard decisions for building owners to make. So understanding kind of what the consequences are and helping owners know what the consequences are, but also trying to help encourage them, to make these decisions they don't want to make because it's a lot of money. So, and a lot of owners don't have an Adrian or a Luke to help hold their hand. So that's really what we'd consider success to be. I think one of the things that we've had success with, we were shocked at how much compliance we got with pathway selection. I think if we had started with like hoping we'd get 50% in, and we had like 70% in initially, and we're almost at like 100% now. So that's what success looks like for us. But going to other programs, one of the real challenges we've had is we were actually the first law that was passed in the United States. So we haven't had a lot of people to go and say, hey, what have you done? There are other cities that have had ongoing initiatives. New York is one of them. I think the thing that I've learned the most from watching other cities develop their programs is cities have certain building stock, certain economies, certain fuel systems and fuel providers that may influence what metrics they're going to use and how they're going to count any pluses or minuses. So I think there's got to be some type of a rulemaking and looking at your own community. I don't think you can create a cookie cutter BEPS.
Got it. Thanks, Christine. That's very helpful. My next question is for Adrian. So Adrian, with respect to certain measures that you've taken to meet BEPS through different retrofit and energy efficiency projects, what are the key metrics that you look for to sort of force rank opportunities to go forward with? And how do you build the case, the business case that is, to pay for these projects and get funding approval internally?
All right, well, that's a great question. It's a challenge. The measures do cost, and in some cases, for affordable housing and others that may operate on thin margins, it is a challenge. And so I mentioned before the Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator, which is a program that DOE and DC did a really nice job setting up to provide assistance for properties that are below the BEPS that need assistance, with just compliance or technical assistance, or even going as far as to fund measures. And so, as Christine mentioned, we're all kind of still learning what, how to best, operate those programs. But just the existence of it is really important for to ensure that, these measures are completed in a fair and equitable way. And so we worked through the retrofit accelerator. We were able to get, a list of measures that could help us move forward with BEPS kind of on a building by building basis. And so some of them we found that they would not be feasible for us, and so we didn't pursue those. But others, we focused on how much energy could we save, what would be our EUI reduction, and then kind of what would be the payback period. And so just for example, some really made good business sense, like the boiler controls. We saw that, those were seeing a payback of like a year or two for those, 1 or 2 heating seasons. And so, with, kind of data like that and evidence like that, we were able to expand it even beyond just, properties that are subject to BEPS, for projects where, the math may not pencil as well, things don't line up as well. I really would kind of encourage everyone to kind of see what funding is available through these types of programs, see what rebates are out there.
Great. Thank you, Adrian. And my last question is for Luke. So Luke, in your presentation, you've identified 5 pillars of sustainable and healthy buildings. How is your team organized to act on these different pillars and these different focus areas? And I guess, what's your process from start to finish at a very high level for identifying opportunities to acting on them? Is it all in-house? Are you working with third-party industry partners? Can you just speak to that, acting on those 5 pillars?
Sure. So I will say it is a lot to manage sometimes. It's myself as the director of sustainability, and then I have a sustainability associate helping oversee our portfolio and these sustainability initiatives. I think something I found helpful in terms of organizing our work is really trying to integrate sustainability into just the general property management accounting workflows that any real estate company has. So for example, I try to make sure we have basically advocates at each of our buildings who are really interested in how they can get the word out to their residents, their clients, about the work that we're doing. It could be things as simple as explaining composting and, regularly helping new residents to some of our residential buildings who might not be familiar with the composting protocol, to, get a bin and see what items can go in that bin. And the fact that that's not all on me or all on my team is incredibly helpful. And I think it really helps to integrate with all of those different functions, because I think at the end of the day, it makes for a more cohesive approach across all of our properties. In particular, I found with, there are some projects that, engineers love to do. They love putting in variable frequency drives. I encourage them to no end. And, where I can find like a potential rebate opportunity or a use case, I think it's exciting for them because it's a really cool piece of technology that can very clearly save energy, but it also doesn't, reduce the end goal of that particular pump or that particular fan. And being able to, for example, take a pump that you normally have a switch for, put it on a VFD, ramp it up and down based on, some demand metric, and then integrating it into a building automation system, that makes it really useful for that engineer to get a full picture of how the building's functioning. And then over time, I can look at the energy use and be like, wow, we're doing really well here. You took this, 30 horsepower motor and you're ramping it down really effectively. We no longer have sort of issues of somebody forgetting to flip that switch, which happens more often than you'd think. And, I think being able to bring in all the people on our team into this mission has been the most helpful, and allowed me to, pursue a lot of different projects while not getting bogged down in like particular minutia that can very easily bog you down if you don't have that support system.
Definitely. Well, thanks, Luke. And with that, I think I'll hand it to John or to Matt to field some participant questions in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you for that. And thanks to the participants for all the questions. Matt, I know you've got some closing comments, so we'll try and save a little time for that. So 2 questions, and I'm just going by the upvotes that people shared. So Chris, there's one for you, Christine. What are the key takeaways from consultations with affordable housing focus groups? And do you have any recommendations on best practices to mitigate impact on tenants, such as renovictions or affordability issues?
So we have done several things with affordable housing. Generally, we are not dealing with the buildings themselves. We do work with, we have a sustainable energy utility that has been executing the affordable housing retrofit accelerator. And with that, we actually paid for audits for buildings that met certain criteria as affordable housing. So we basically funded the audits, and they're getting more of a bespoke approach to the program, and also, options for green bank. And we do have a full-time employee that works with that. And the other thing that we did do internally was we did we have a internal study that we look at our most vulnerable populations and things like displacement and how what we can do to do that. There's a lot of things we can't do, but what we did realize is that there's a lot of other both government and non-governmental agencies that can do that outreach.
Fantastic, thank you. And the second question was just a general one, and maybe some of the participants have an answer to this question as well. A number of organizations are looking for data sources on expected costs from various types of improvements, right? So it's like we want to know upfront what it costs. And it's a valid question. I think probably as more data comes available, it'll be easier to get that. I'm not sure, Luke or Adrian, if you have any costing data that you've used in the past.
I wish I had a great spreadsheet to share with people. This is a massive challenge. The commercial scale buildings, by their very nature, just like everything's a little bit bespoke. And yeah, that's been a challenge we've run into. The way I've approached basically getting cost information is starting work with like particularly an engineering firm who can really scope out exactly what might be needed. And then, trying to get pricing from various vendors based on that scope of work. That said, like there's not a great rule of thumb that I've found. And I think our biggest experience has been like with our current vendors. They sort of know what they know. And if they aren't familiar with something, like it usually is not something they're going to work very hard to find. So that is definitely a big challenge. And the cost can be oftentimes very high. So definitely getting some bids from different folks and getting more comfortable with sort of design build opportunities might be a good option. Like we found sometimes a firm won't even give you like engineering documentation unless they can win the business at the end. So yeah, it's a problem in the industry, and I don't have a great solution for it. So
Thank you for that. There was a second part to the first question, and I think we might have enough time to squeeze that in, and then for Matt, for you to finish stuff off. So I'd love to hear the perspective of the property managers, so Luke and Adrian, on the financial considerations or lessons learned that you have with respect to implementing building energy performance standards. And that's more on the rent control side, but any lessons learned that you have on that side would be welcome.
Sure. So I'll try to take this one. I think, the lesson that I've learned the most is just to kind of get involved with the programs that are out there to that can offer support, that's funding through programs like the accelerator. That was kind of our biggest focus, was just getting involved and trying to justify the payments for some of these improvements.
All right, well, thank you. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time today, both our panelists, of course, our moderator and participants. So Matt, just over to you for some final words.
Perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to again thank everyone for joining today, and for our panelists and moderator. For those of you who are on the call who are looking to get involved or more involved with building performance standards across the country, we flagged a few different opportunities here, and we'll send this out in kind of a follow-up email afterwards. But as I mentioned before, like Toronto's still in the process of developing their policy. The Atmospheric Fund is helping out with a campaign there. So we'll send some contact information that you can get involved with, and they'll be launching an initiative in the coming kind of weeks on that front. At the national level, Efficiency Canada has a building performance standard knowledge network that's meeting quarterly and has a number of different stakeholders, ranging from utilities to building owners to kind of industry. So if you're interested in taking part with that, again, we'll share that information. NRCan also has some information available, more focused on governments, but around kind of how to set up BPS. So we'll do that. And I think John's going to just include a little link in the chat. If you are interested in kind of, again, being more engaged, we're happy to share your information with some of our partners who are working on this on the ground in Toronto and Quebec and BC and whatnot. So please do just sign up. It's pretty quick, just email address or whatnot, and we'll keep you in the loop as we hear more. Last piece I just wanted to touch on is just, if you are interested in becoming a partner and aren't already, please do check out our website. No cost or anything like that. We're really just looking for input from our partnership in terms of kind of the initiatives that we're undertaking and how we move the needle on this decarbonization piece. So with that, we do have one final poll. Just let us know how you like the webinar today. And with that, again, one more time, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining and everyone for sharing their insights and kind of lessons learned on what you've been up to and how you're dealing with BEPS in your locale. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.